We're we're not getting any audio coming from you, and I'm not seeing any audio indication on the microphone on the right-hand side in the participant group.
Okay. Can we hear?
Now I got you.
Ah.
Now we got you.
Is this the mic? So you might want to, I don't know if it lets you move any closer.
Can you hear me on there?
I've got you loud and clear.
Okay, excellent.
I think that's as far as we're going.
Yes.
You want to do your spiel again?
All right, so I'll go ahead and do my spiel again.
Can everybody else hear?
Can everybody hear me? Just give me a thumbs up if you can hear. Gotcha. Okay. All right. Okay, great. Thanks. All right. So Chief Taylor here. So I'll just go ahead and do my spiel again since no one heard me the last time. But anyways, Chief Taylor, good afternoon, everybody. Glad you guys are here. We're here for the Enlisted Promotion Board Professional Development. I've got Chief Vaughan here, and he is the 355th Fighter Group Superintendent out at DM. He kicked, clawed, screamed to get on the last board so he could bring this information to y'all. And so that way we can all get smarter on the new process and the new board system. He sat on the last E7 board. And so he's got tons of information. Just a couple of things. If your mic is not muted, we're going to ask you guys to go ahead and mute your mic now. If you have a question, please just use the hand icon and raise your hand if you want to go ahead and ask your question live. If you don't want to do that, if you want to type your question in the chat, we've got the chat up so we can see your questions there. But we'll go ahead and get started. He's got tons of good information, and so Chief Vaughan.
Excellent. Thanks for the introduction. So I'm Chief Vaughan. I'll give a very, very brief history. I was a weather guy for 18 years. Did that until about 2 years ago when I moved up to the fighter group here on Davis-Montcalm. And so throughout my career, worked a lot with the Army. I've done headquarters, I've done detachments, so I've kind of been all over the place. Sat on a lot of various boards, strat boards, vector boards, obviously BTZ, course distribution. But the one I never had an opportunity to sit on yet was promotion board. I was coming up from 2 years out of my career field, and like she said, I really had to fight, claw, and scratch, get a bunch of command chiefs involved, A1 up at ACC, and finally got a seat on this one because I knew it was my last chance. The reason I wanted to sit on it was not because it's fun. It's you want to claw your eyes out at the end of pretty much every day. It's not a fun process. But somebody said once that trying to figure out what a promotion board was looking for was trying to get a moving dartboard in a blackout room. And I want to be able to shed as much light as I can on that. And AFPC encourages us to give these briefs and talk about the processes and procedures. We just can't talk directly about board proceedings. So we can't talk about a certain record or whatnot. But you guys ask all the questions you want, and I will tell you if there's something that I can't answer directly, but I'll do the best I can. So we'll get started. If we go next slide, please.
So we'll do screen share.
I think you guys should be seeing the slides we're on right now. So overview what we're going to go through, kind of talk about who convenes the board, who the authority is, what it looks like, and then the operations and selection process, probably what you're more interested in. So we'll kind of breeze through the admin part and get to the good stuff. Next. But feel free to raise your hand or chime in. So the entire board works for the Chief Staff of the Air Force. He's the one who convenes it, and he gives us guidance via the formal charge. Next slide, please. So the formal charge, anybody can find. It's on on my purse, and you can go in there and just search for formal charge, and you see this is what popped up on there, and you can look at whichever year you want to see. So it talks about specific things that is valuable to the Air Force, to the Chief Staff of the Air Force, that they want you to take into consideration. I've got my copy right here. We referred to this continually through the board process, especially the last 3 pages. So some of the things they talked about there was whole person concept. We'll go a little bit deeper into that, but some of the areas they looked at was kind of what you'd expect: your primary duty, your training, your education, your experience. The experience part was the part I really appreciated. Force distribution, how much it should play, and then future roles it actually addressed to that little 3-box part on the EPR. And it also talks about promotion processes and addresses the chronic critical skills. So I believe, and you guys can help me out, I believe the selection rate across the Air Force was what, 20%, 17%, something like that. But we promoted various career fields, everything from, I think it was 9% to 60%. So some career fields are promoted at a lower rate because you promote to vacancies. If there's no vacancy, they can't promote people to it. But other career fields have a lot of vacancy and they get a chronic critical skills bonus. So for example, my duty functional area, weather, I think we promoted 38% or something like that. So it was quite a bit higher than the average. So you get a little bonus. Next. So whole person concept. I will kind of slow down this one a little bit. So whole person concept. Whenever I've heard that in the past, and I talk a lot about it, is it's always 2 words that people think of: education and volunteering. And those are amazing things. And I could talk all day about the values of each and why we value them. But I really like the way it's laid out here by the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. And it lists their factor that they're looking for, and then it tells you what to evaluate. So we're looking at performance. Obviously, we're looking at EPRs and training reports for anybody that's cross-trained. Then they start getting into some stuff that really gets to the heart of what the EPR is, and that's documenting your performance in your primary duty or additional duties. So you talk about professional competence. Well, what expertise do you have within the specialty? And I would argue that you can show expertise by showing that you're making your job better. If you don't truly understand your job, I think it would be very difficult to make it better. And I think it's pretty general knowledge that any bullets that show that you made something bigger, better, faster, smarter, cheaper, more efficient is generally a good thing. We like to show that. As far as I'm concerned, you probably have to be an expert within your functional area to know how to make that better. So those really highlight that. Leadership is always going to be front and center on any NCO, and especially a senior NCO EPR. So who did you supervise? Were you part of a staff? Like what kind of leadership role? Leadership doesn't necessarily just mean the number of people that you supervise. It can also be something like staff work, where you take care of some command. I remember I was looking for a job one time when I was a master sergeant. I reached out to a chief mentor of mine. I was like, hey, chief, I'm thinking about applying for this job. However, there's only 9 people at that location, and I'm leaving a location where I have 30 or 40 people. And he kind of laughed. He's like, Noah, I got promoted to chief as a senior with 3 people under me. You'll be fine. It's about what you do with it. How well did you supervise those? How did you carry your duties? So it's a data point, but don't think that you're non-promotable if you only supervise a few people. Something you don't really have much control over. Job responsibility. So what is the scope of your responsibility? Are you in a position where you are over a lot of people, a lot of programs, big dollar amounts, geographic areas? What levels are you serving? Are you at tactical level, operational level, strategic level? And then kind of your exposure. I put exposure in with breadth of experience because as you move around to different assignments, as you deploy, as you do a special duty, as you do something outside your core functional area, you're exposed to a lot of things that gives you that breadth of experience. And that's very valuable to the Air Force. Specific achievements stand out. We could argue all day about if we have enough awards, too many awards, who gets them, is it the right people? But bottom line is awards stand out because they're showing that you have been noticed amongst your peers. And then last is education. And these are in no particular order, but I kind of like how they have education last because I value education highly. I love it. It develops critical thinking skills that we need in our senior NCOs and future leaders. But I especially like what they say on here about level and the second part, utilization. If you go out and you get your German polka history master's degree, I don't really see how that's going to help your workstation a lot. I don't see how it's going to help the airmen around you a tremendous amount, as you know, as opposed to getting something either in your functional area or something leadership, management, math. I mean, there's all kinds of ways we can utilize education to make not only ourselves better, but more importantly, our coworkers, our subordinates, our work center. We've probably all seen and had in your own EPRs, I know I have, some bullet that says completed 2 classes, earned 6 credits, you have a GPA, because everybody has a GPA, right? And then it says something like on track to graduate spring 21. And that's fine, there's nothing wrong with that. But I honestly don't care too much about a GPA. The fact that you will graduate one day is pretty irrelevant because obviously you're going to graduate one day. But what means a lot more to me is if you say you earned those 6 credit hours, it was in something leadership management, something you can use, and then what did you do in your work center? Did you improve a process? Did you develop your people? Like, what did you do with that? And that's where you can wring some more horsepower out of what is otherwise a fairly standard education bullet. Next slide. All right, and the whole person, can you actually read out everything?
So we've got a question from Columbia that we just went ahead and typed in. The question is, in the whole person concept slides, the slide that we're looking at, are those factors in order of importance?
No, that's a good question. I will read on here directly what it says to us from the Chief of Staff charge. Find it. Senior Air Force leadership reviewed and approved the factors listed on this slide. The factors beyond job performance were not listed in any particular order, nor was any specific weight assigned to any one factor. So, you know, you kind of have to list it out on here, but the order of it past your performance, which should always be the baseline, really is irrelevant. Good question. Moving on, this is in case you guys are really geeks and want to dig into U.S. code and what authorities we operate under. You know, I think it's pretty common knowledge that the super grades, the 89, are limited by law. But this is the direction that guided us. Next, we had to read it. It was super boring.
Chief Mullins has a question.
All right, what do we have?
Hey, Chief, I really do appreciate you taking the time to brief this, but I do have a quick question going back to the previous slide on the scope of responsibility.
Yes, sir.
From what I've seen, there's a lot of, notice, you went too far. It talks about job responsibilities, scope levels, and exposure. There's a lot of emphasis on duty titles versus actually capturing what our airmen do on a day in and day out basis. Was there any mention about duty titles through that entire board process, as far as, you know, a section chief versus an N2IC, and then when the scope of responsibilities didn't necessarily match up to what those made up duty titles were?
Yeah, so I'll jump on my soapbox for a minute about duty titles. So I'll tell a quick story and then I'll answer your question. So I used to worship at the altar of duty titles, and I mean, I was a senior master, and I got I got very direct with my group chief at the time. He's our career field manager now. He's a great dude. But essentially, we had tech sergeants working what's called a senior duty officer position in my organization, and they removed that ability for our NCOs and senior NCOs, and it was all officers who were doing it now. And I had some very seasoned, sharp people who went from being kind of the senior person to kind of doing the normal desk shift work. There was a lot of hurt feelings, and there was a lot of people who were afraid it was going to impact their careers. And I talked to the chief, and he was like, Noah, duty titles do not matter. It's what you do in your capacity. And I'll be honest, and I've told this to him, that I did not believe him. I straight up didn't. And, you know, I fussed and argued with him about that. Fast forward maybe a year, I was a senior master sergeant, so on a couple of years, sitting in a E7 position as a flight chief. I was the only one in my entire career field as a flight chief, as a senior master sergeant, and I ended up getting promoted to chief as a flight chief. And once that happened, I went to him and apologized. I ate a little crow, and I said, Randy, I apologize. I was kind of an asshole about that, and I appreciate you giving me some good guidance. So what I tell people is that there's two things you really have little to no control over in the Air Force. Well, there's probably more, but two specific ones. You don't really get to choose your duty title, and you don't get to choose who supervises you. I've never been anywhere that says, hey, what would you like your duty title to be? And do you like Sergeant Smith over here? You know, if you do, we'll make them your supervisor. It just doesn't happen. So it's about what you do in your position. And if you think about it, and I wish I had a whiteboard or something, but if you think about it, if the highest you can perform, let's say that's a scale of 10. 10 is, this is like your level-to level effort, like, you know, performing in all cylinders, hard as you can all the time. If you're a flight chief, then I expect you to perform about a 7 or an 8. And you don't have a whole lot of room to go before you top out at 10. If you're not a flight chief, if you're some position in 2IC or something under that, I'm probably expecting about a 5 or a 6 from, you know, this is what you're trained to do, paid to do. And you've got a whole lot more direction that you can excel in before you hit that ceiling that's kind of the most anybody can do. If you're in a duty position, duty title, that is below where you feel your skills lay, you have a lot of bandwidth to do all those things that the person in that position, they're using all their bandwidth to tread water. So duty titles, they are a data point. They're a very minor data point. And the only thing, Chief, going back to your question, the only thing that the board charge tells us is look for normal career progression within their specialty. That's it. Does that answer you?
Very, very well said, Chief. I'm under the same mindset that duty titles don't mean a whole lot. It's about the 4 bullets that describe the scope of responsibility.
Absolutely.
Because like you said, you don't always get to choose where you're assigned, so you have to grow where you're planted and take advantage of the opportunities that you have wherever you are, and not worry about those duty titles as much as a lot of folks put emphasis on it.
Yeah, and I'm hard-handed. It took me a while, but I finally, it finally slapped me in the face, and I figured it out. So,
all right, appreciate it. Thanks.
All right, we've got another question from Columbia. It says, awards are important, but do the awards your people get weigh more?
So that's a great question. That is a frequently asked one and a frequently discussed one among chiefs and senior leaders that I associate with. And that is going to be extremely subject to that member's point of view. There's a lot of people who, when they look at a record and they see that somebody's doing awesome stuff at work and they see that they get personal awards, some people ask the question, but what are they doing for their airmen? There's other ones that when they see it in there, they say, well, that's great, but that's their airman's award, not theirs, and they're just taking credit for that. And I wish I could give you a straight answer, and it's something we didn't really talk about during the board. This is just in general. I've heard that conversation a lot. For me, I'm sure I could, get a show of hands everybody on here. Probably everyone on here has gotten an award that your supervisor had 0 to do with. If I see a supervisor claiming that they helped their airmen win the Levito at ALS, I got to throw the flag on that, because you shouldn't have been at ALS with your airmen helping them win that award. Now, were you a general good supervisor and gave them strong mentorship along the way? Absolutely, and that's what you're paid to do. That is part of being an NCO. There's ones that you more directly influence, like if you wrote the package for your airmen and you murderboarded it, and maybe you run the unit professional development or awards program, I think that carries a little more weight than just saying you had some airmen that won some stuff when they were off TDY and doing amazing things. I think there's a way to write it that it's valuable and it doesn't look like you're just trying to take all credit for everything your airmen did. I've seen stuff in the past where a supervisor will go around and ask how many classes did all their airmen do, and then they say that they mentored them to complete 200 credit hours. Well, might be a stretch. Maybe they really are that into education, they really harped on their folks. Maybe not. So I wish I could give you a better answer, but it really comes down to who's reading it. I'll tell you this, I don't think it'll hurt anybody to show that they're helping to recognize their airmen, but I think your experience will vary, and the mileage that you get out of that will vary depending on the members. So sorry to be vague, but it's the most honest answer I can give. All right, so I see a PCS deck question. I'm going to get to decks a little bit later. Pop back on and re-ask if I don't address it at that point. Next. All right, list board composition. So this is kind of what it looks like. I told you we work for the Chief Staff of the Air Force. A board president, a 1-star, is the ranking member at AFPC that's over this. And then every panel has 2 chiefs and a colonel. So we'll kind of get down a little bit more in how many panels and who does what and what it looks like. But essentially there's 6 for support, 4 for maintenance, 3 for ops, and 1 for mid. It's a total of 42 members on the E7 promotion board panel. Next. So this is what it looks like broken out. So you see support panel 1, there are 8 AFSCs that they are grading and a total of 1,710 records. And if you go to the next slide, so I was on panel 9. So it shows here we had 12 AFSCs and 1,403 records. Maintenance took the cake with 2,075 records that panel 13 was going through. So you have some that range from the 1,300s to the 2,000s, probably an average in there, not good at public math, probably 1,600 or 1,700. Next. All right, so board president, they're a 1-star, they go around doing 1-star things, they're amazing. They monitor everything, they ensure we're doing the formal charge, adhering to it. They conduct quality reviews on everything, and yeah, he was good. Next. All right, so the selection board secretariat team, these guys were heroes. You want to talk about a rough job? Have a captain trying to control a room of 42 chiefs and colonels and rope them in and tell them it's break time over and stop talking so much. And poor little Captain Schloss, man, every time we'd lean over and be like, man, I'm going crazy over here. He'd be like, do you need to talk about something? Do you need me? What do you got? So he was good. They all deserve kudos. This is kind of what it looked like. There's a bunch of people behind the curtains, the lieutenant colonel and the civilians, and they monitor everything as we go, let us know if you're too far ahead, too far behind schedule. When everybody's done with an AFSC, you can move to the next one. And then they come out and talk to us about splits and grays, which we'll go into some detail on here in a few minutes. So that's just kind of what the team looks like. Next. Rules of engagement. So we coordinate with staff prior to discussing anything. So like I said, if you lean over and ask somebody how their lunch was, the captain's going to run over and ask if there's anything you need him to be a part of the discussion. So they keep us reined in pretty tight. We are not allowed to gather info from outside sources. We have access to the EBOS system, which you'll see in a minute. We don't have email, we do not have cell phones, and we are not allowed to go on the internet because you can't gather any kind of outside information. We'll talk about the scoring scale and splits in a minute, but we are not allowed to intentionally score high or low in order to drive a discussion, because the only time we're allowed to speak to each other is during a split. So if I saw a record and I'm like, man, I really want to talk about this one, I couldn't put a 6 on there instead of an 8 in order to ensure that we're going to talk about that record. And they can see that pretty easily. Silence. And you want to talk about weird, being in a room, no phones, no email, no noise. Like you can hear somebody on the other side of the room chewing gum. It is quiet in there from 7:30 in the morning till 5 o'clock in the evening with a little break for lunch. It's different. Next, I think I have a picture of the room. So here's the room. So this is what we were in. I sat right under that red light on the left there and stared at the entry door right across from there as people going in and out. It's nice. You guys can see those monitors are all, I mean, it's kind of funky with the fisheye view, but they're nice widescreen, touch screen monitors. We had phenomenal internet in there. It was a great system. And you could hear the guy in that back corner chewing gum. He chewed a lot of gum. Next. So I was nervous going into it. I think, you know, most people is naturally nervous going in there when you're going to have a significant impact on somebody's career and life. And I had never scored promotion records before, so this is kind of a big thing. But I'll say it gave me a lot of faith in the system, how they trained us for that. So they gave us a set of, first day, after they did the board brief and read us the 3-page or 5-page charge, they gave us a sample of 10 records. Now, these records were from a couple years ago, a career field, it was random career field. And so they gave us 10 records. And the sampling of records had everything from force distributions, a lot of good stuff, to referrals and Article 15s. And you scored them all independently as an entire 42-person panel. And it took us a couple hours. And then at the very end of that, we discussed it as an entire room. And it really brought us really close to kind of what we need to look at. It was a great discussion. We talked about everything you can imagine. Any question you guys ask on here, I can almost guarantee it came up during that probably hour and a half long discussion about every record, every section. What do we value? What do we notice? What do we not value? And it was good. So it really set our scoring standard. It helped us kind of, go into a shooting analogy, helped us tighten our shot group about what we scored it. And then they broke us off into our actual panel. So panel 9 for me, Colonel, and another chief. And they gave us another set of 5 records from this year, but not from a career field that we were going to be scoring during live scoring. So we did that, and it tightened us up even more, because now we're kind of mind melding as a panel. So the 3 of us, like I got 2 other people in this room, but just 3 of us talking about what did you value, what did you notice, how do we do that? And we were really tight on what we were looking for by the end of that trial run. So that essentially took up the entire first day. We didn't start live scoring until day 2. So they took an entire day of explaining to us what we were there for, the weight of what we were doing, some left and right boundaries, and then really ensured that we were good on understanding. You know, to use an Army phrase, we leveled the bubbles. All right, next slide, please. So here we go. So we are going. What we saw on that screen was the senior NCO selection record, and we viewed it on a system called EBOS. EBOS is an acronym that I don't think I wrote down. Electronic board scoring system or something like that. But it's a really good system. This is all you see on your screen. And if you click the slide or go down one. So if you go down, so I'm going to start off in the right stack. So the right stack it's what's called your senior NCO selection brief. I'm going to refer to it as a SERF or a truncated SERF. You'll have to forgive me because it's not really a SERF. But all the info is on there. It's on your SERF. But even though it's small in there, you'll notice a lot of stuff isn't on there. So it has some very basic data in the top right. Your name, when you came to the Air Force, how long you've been in Stripe, if you have a higher tenure. That's essentially it up there, what your AFSC is. In the middle part is decorations. So which decorations you've received, how many, when the last closeout was, and if it was an achievement or a PCS or whatnot. Same exact info that's on your CERF as far as decorations. Then the final part is your duty history with assignments and duty titles. And again, that's directly out of your CERF. So what's not in there is education, if you're married, if you have any duty limiting codes. There's none of that stuff in there. Your EPR history. So past the 5 years EPR that's in the very left stack, you don't know if you were, you know, a bit of a challenged airman and got a stack of 2s or something. You don't know that. So that's the senior NCO selection brief, or as I call it, the truncated set. Moving on. So the next stack is the middle stack. The middle stack has all your decorations. So your entire career has all your decorations. Interesting to note, if you were prior sister service, so you were Navy, Marines, Army prior, your decorations will be in there. And it's the only place in the entire record that you can tell that they were prior service in another branch. So you'd see something from a Marine corporal or an Army sergeant or a Navy, you know, whatever they are, because it's all different names for their different rates and grades. So it's got all of those. So it's got your joint decorations, it's got your sister service decorations. It's a lot of Army decks. You know, we've been doing so many joint taskings over the years, and we got so many people attached to Army. I've got a bunch of Army decks in my stack. One thing about Army decorations is that if you guys have ever seen them, all it essentially says is that you existed at a place in time and you did a good job. It says that you were part of 252 CAB during these dates and you did outstanding. And that's it. There's no details. There's no meat and potatoes behind it. The form that they write it up on is 658 or something like that. That's kind of like what we have in our decoration. There's 4 boxes there, but we do not see any of that stuff. So you kind of just got to take it at face value. You can kind of tell if it was deployment or exercise based on the length or if it's PCS, but you're kind of doing a lot of guesswork. So you just kind of give it whatever weight it is. The middle stack is also where you'll see any courts martials that the member had in their career, and also any Article 15s that were either in the last 2 years or it falls off after it's met 1 senior NCO promotion board. So let's say it happened a year ago or it just happened. It's going to be in there for this one and it'll be off on the next one. Now that doesn't mean that the EPR that documents it won't be in the stack, because it will. But the actual court-martial paperwork will only be on there once. After that, it's gone, or after 2 years, it's gone. Next, please. All right, so the final stack, the left stack, this is where this is the meat and potatoes of what you look at. This is where you spend the majority of your time. This is the EPRs. So the Senior NCO Selection Board looks at the previous 5 years of records. So if you'll notice on this one, it says 1 of 12. So what that tells me at a glance is this person, more than likely, was a staff sergeant on their first record, and they got promoted to tech sergeant somewhere along the line, because there's 12 records. So you figure front and back, there's 2 pages per record. So there's 6 records in there, which, you know, once you get promoted, you move to the next SCOD, which essentially puts an extra one in the stack. When we would see 1 of 10, that usually meant that there was either an EPR missing or that the person had been a tech sergeant for the past 5 years. Every now and then we'd see 1 of 18 or 1 of 22. And in general, what that told us is there is probably a referral EPR in there with the referral EPR document and with any rebuttal. When I start talking about timing, I'll kind of tell you how we did that. But I'll keep moving, but obviously if there's any questions, like pipe up and I'll answer. But this is what we looked at. It was on that nice big flat screen. We could tap back and forth between stuff. And you could have 2 things expanded at one time. So you could have the surf and the EPRs up at one time, nice big on the screen. Next.
Is this where you wanted to talk about the PCS decorations? Or is that further down?
I think it's in my notes at the end. But yeah, thanks. Help me keep you on. All right, so day in the life. So I think I told you guys there's 42 members on the board, colonels and chief, 14 panels. We essentially went from 0730 to 1700 with a lunch in there. So on a typical day, I would say once people were hitting their stride, from talking to everybody, it sounded like everybody was grading records in between 3 and 5 minutes. Now this is a pretty big average, as in, if you pull up a record and on very top there's a court martial and it's pretty obvious that somebody did something they shouldn't have, there's not a lot of time you need to spend on that board. That is when you kind of look at it and you move on. However, if you're looking through a record and maybe there's a referral EPR a couple back, and you slow down and you would read every word of the referral document and of the rebuttal. And that's where you really have to start looking at, what did they do? Was it a mistake? Was it a hiccup? Was it illegal, immoral, unethical? How did they recover? What did it look like after that? What did their rebuttal say? Did they own it and say, I'll do better? Or did they not do a rebuttal? Because that tells a story too. But the good part is there is, like I always heard, you get 30 seconds to look at a record, that's all your career is worth. They're breezing over it, and unless you have good stuff on the back, they'll never read it. Well, that's a load of crap. The board people that work there, they never rushed us. You know, they would tell you if you're on track, and they would tell you if you were getting a little behind, but they never rushed you. And I felt like I had plenty of time to score everything. When the 3 board members or panel members score, there's 0 talking. You click the button at bottom of the EBOS screen, you lock in your score, and you move on. And that's it until there's a split or a gray. So you kind of send it off and you move on to the next one. At my peak towards the end, I was doing approximately about 180 records per day. I think if you do the math, it was about 2.5 minutes per record, but there was pretty big variations in there depending on what was in the record. All right, next please. Scoring scale. So you guys might have seen this. It's kind of the Air Force's way to score records. If you guys have been are familiar with scoring awards packages, you normally score them by the line with every bullet getting a numeric value, half point, 3 points, whatever value it is you use. For records, you're looking at the duty history, you're looking at the decorations, and you're looking at any EPRs, any force distribution, any not ready now, any referrals. You factor all that in and you give it 1 score for the entire record. So it starts off in the middle with average being 7.5. And it goes, you know, if anything below that is below average, anything above that is above average. So you can kind of see there's some words associated with it: slightly above, strong, few could be better, outstanding, absolute superior, etc. On the very right-hand side is the equivalent of your overall board score, assuming that so if all members graded you an 8, you're going to be about a 360 board score. And we'll break that down a little bit further, I think, next slide or one of the next ones. So this is the scoring scale that we used. Hey, look at that. All right, I do have a typo on here, so let me address that. I've already fixed it on my slides. The third bullet says you multiply the composite by a factor of 17. It is 15. And the math below has a 15, not 17. So I apologize for that. Fortunately, Sergeant Ochoa over at Wings Staff Agency caught it and called Chief out. So we're on it. So each panel member is going to score the individual record between 6 and 10, 7.5 being average. At the end, when the board figures out, when the people behind the curtain figure out what the board score is, they add those 3 together. So again, we'll talk about 3 people in here. You know, Chief did she did an 8, I did 7.5, and over here you did, sorry, what's your name?
7.
So you did, you know, a 7. So you add that together and I'm not going to do that in public, but that is your composite score. That composite score gets multiplied by a factor of 15, and that will end up telling you what your total board score is. So some very simple board math using reverse engineering is if you look at what your board score was, you can approximate what the average was from the board. So if you got a 360, divide that by 15, would say your composite score was 24, you divide that by 3, which means that you had an 8 average. It might be a 7.5, an 8, and an 8.5. It might have been 2 8s and a 7, but the average would have been you guys see what I'm saying. Same thing with 405. Divide that by 15, you get 27. Divide that by 3, and your average board score would have been a 9. Hopefully that clears up what the board score is. Now this is on the promotion board. On the evaluation board in years previous, there was more to it than that, and we'll kind of take a look at that, I believe, next. So evaluation board. So prior to April of 19, this is what factors were looked at for going to Master Sergeant. So the green was the board score. The blue was the PFE SKT, so the WAPS portion that you studied for and tested. And then there was at 25 points for decorations, the red portion. And this tells you your max points in the different sections, and your total score was somewhere 575, 675, with a board score of 450. So these were factors that were considered. The Air Force has seen fit to remove all that. So going to next slide. This is what's considered now. Board score. That's it. If you're eligible to meet the board, what those board members say, that is your score. And hopefully I kind of explained what that formula was. Next. So every now and then we have something called a split. And a split happens when the 3 board members are not all on the same page within 1 point of that member's record. So in this example, the colonel in this one, he had an 8, chief on the right, so number 3 had a 7.4, 7.5. So they're within half point with each other, that's fine. But old Darth Grader over here on the left, or Scrooge, they went with a 6.5. They didn't like something in that record, and they thought it was well below average, where the other chief had average, and the colonel had slightly above average. So at the end of the day or before lunch or whenever the panel members decide, the people behind the curtain go tell the recorder, hey, there's a split on panel 9. And the captain comes over and he's like, panel 9, please finish grading the last record you're on. We need to do split resolution. So everybody finishes grading their current one. They submit it. And then they say, go to whatever AFSC, and you go to that and it'll say split. So you pull it up. And it'll show you how many records you're split on. The key parts here is every member can discuss the split. So let's say I'm the chief that did a 7.5. I can discuss with the colonel and the other chief the records. And essentially you go through any notes that you took and you say, well, here's what I saw for that member. They had a promote now back in 17 when they promoted to tech, and they've continued to do good things. They got a promote sitting on top. They had an annual award back when, if you read their decks, they were Levito and ALS. They've received PCS decks at every PCS. They deploy, whatever it is. You're just kind of hitting the highlight reel for that record, what you liked or didn't like. And then maybe panel member 2, the chief, is like, hey, saw that, but did you also see they had a not ready now the year after they made tech? And maybe you'd say, oh, wow, I don't know how we missed that. So then maybe the colonel comes down. Or maybe the person scored a 6.5, maybe they didn't notice that promote now back in 17. I don't know, whatever the thing is. But you kind of talk it out. So everybody can discuss, but only to 2 members involved in the split with more than a 1 point separation can change their score. So in this one, my example, I would not be able to do anything other than discuss. And one of 2 things is going to happen. Well, 3 things. The colonel can go down half a point, the chief can come up half a point, or they can both meet in the middle and come down half and go up half. So any of those resolves the split. So as long as you get where your two scores are within one of each other, then the split is resolved. Now, I would tell you, I think as a testament to our panel, and from what I understand, this is not inconsistent with other panels, we did 1,408 records, I believe is what it was by the very end. They added a few in. And out of all that, we had a total number of 42 splits. And I actually did the math on it. If you round it up or down, whatever it was roughly 3% of records. So I think if you can get two bullheaded chiefs and a colonel in a room, and you can agree within 1 point of over 1,400 records, with only 14 being ones that you differed by that much, I think that is a raging success by any measure. It gave me tremendous faith in the board. And I'll tell you, out of those 42 splits, there maybe was 3 that we had to discuss for longer than a minute. And there was only one where the other chief and I, man, we locked horns. And poor Colonel, he's trying to play mediator and talk us up or down. And both of us were like, I ain't moving. Like, I believe this is good for this reason, or I value this negative so highly, I just can't get off of it. So what we ended up doing is the Colonel talked one of us into coming up a half point, the other one down a half point. So if you run the math out, they got the exact same board score as they would have with the offset. So I had a lot of faith in split resolutions. It normally, like I said, we only really had to discuss about 3 of them in depth. All the other ones, somebody missed something, which again, gave me more faith in the system, because you're getting 3 eyes independently with 0 discussion on something. And then if somebody missed something, you got a couple of people to catch you up. So I think it's a phenomenal system. Moving on. So splits weren't too bad. So now we're going to talk about the part that sucked. That was called grays. So in a perfect world, this is kind of how it works. So let's say we're doing random AFSC and they are promoting 39 people out of however many eligible. So on the left, that is the composite board score, so 25.5. So, figure out the math is, I don't know, 7.5, 7.5, 6.5, whatever it is. And you add those 3 together, you get 25.5. In that bin of composite scores, there are 4 records. And that took us from 35 cumulative records from the 26.0 board score, or cumulative score, or composite score. There we go. Can't talk today. Took us to 39, which is a magic number, which means the people behind the curtain can say, we're promoting 39, and after we look at everybody with a 25.5 composite score, we have exactly the right amount of people to promote. Hallelujah, moving on. Well, that's not the way it works in the real world. I don't think we had a single AFSC that we didn't have to do gray zone resolution. So let's go to the next slide. We'll talk about what in reality it looked like. So let's use the same 39 people that we're going to promote for this AFSC. And you see now at the end of the 25.5 composite scale, it took us from 32 records, it added 3 more on top. Now we're at 35. If you go to the next bin of composite score of 25, we have 9 records, but we know we only can promote 4 more people. So now we have to do what's called gray zone resolution. Gray zone resolution was my least favorite part of the whole board process. Because when we're doing gray zone resolution, go to the next slide. When we're doing gray zone resolution, actually go back up, I'll talk about that in a second. When we're doing gray zone resolution, what they tell you is, please go in, rescore all 9 records in that bin, the 25.0, use the same scoring scale and techniques you've used in the past, and rescore them without speaking or referring to your previous notes. So we would do that. And if we did exactly what the board said, you would come out the same exact scores. you know, if you've heard the definition of insanity, it's doing the same thing again, expecting different results. So this was very frustrating and difficult because if you use your exact same technique, you come up with the exact same score. This is also when it really set into me, and I think to the board members too, it added additional weight to what we were doing. When they come up and they say, okay, panel 9, please rescore these 9 records, and there are 4 stripes to give. It really hit us because you were choosing the number 39 out of 39, and you're also picking who's the number 1 non-select. And I'll tell you the difference between that number 1 non-select and that 39th person who got a stripe, there isn't one. You're looking at almost identical records for whatever that core field is. And you have to dig deep to really figure out those differences. Because the differences, initially, we would have scored it differently, and they would have been in a higher bin or a lower bin. So it's very difficult, and you know you're promoting people or not very clearly. So it was tough. So how do you know if you were in the gray zone? If you got promoted this year during this cycle, how do I know if I was in the gray zone? All right, next slide will explain that. So this is something AFPC sent out, and it talks about what it is, a gray zone, but what I really liked is the middle part. When this happens, the promotion board rescore all records in the gray zone until the cut line falls between airmen having different scores. The last sentence is the most interesting. Airmen selected in the gray zone will receive the original gray zone board score increased by 0.5. So if you think back to the last slide, and we had all those airmen in the 25 bin, if you multiply 25 by 15, that number is going to be one of the normal zones for promotion. So let's just say, for sake of argument, it's, I don't know, 352.5, and that's a normal bin of people being selected. You're going to see one of 353. That will be your board score. So you won't be in one of those other bins with everybody else. You'll have a 0.5 increase on your board score. So when the panel members are doing it, let's just say, for sake of argument, everybody scored that person a 7. And that board score, you know, 7 plus 7 plus 7 times 15, that would be their score. This will add a 0.5 point to that. And that's how you kind of know if you're in the gray zone and you made the cut. You know, if not, you fall below it. So that's gray zone resolution. It was kind of a arduous process that we didn't enjoy very much, but those are records that took us the longest. We slowed way down and rescored those, reread it from start to finish. Did we miss anything? Because you really want to make sure you're getting those right people. Next slide. Takeaways. So at the end of the day, it gave me a tremendous amount of faith in the board process. I do not feel, after seeing the process, that it is quite the moving dartboard in the blacked out room that you're trying to figure out what the board's looking at. The number one takeaway that I can tell you, for your troops, for your coworkers, please check your records. Go into Prada, check your records. There is a selection folder on there that shows everything the board's going to see. I cannot tell you how many times I raised my hand and the captain came over and I said, the surf, that truncated surf, says there's 5 decorations and 2 Air Force comms. However, I'm only seeing 4 decorations, 1 Air Force comm. And they would go away and they would come back and they would either say, we found it, please look again. Or they would say, and this is the heartbreaking part, please score as is. And you knew the person's missing out on those potential goodies that were in that one. So decorations do not add point value per se. You know, we took away the 25 points for deck, so a comm does not automatically equal 3 points, but it does factor in. And, you know, we had a question about PCS decks, and let's say that missing decoration was from your PCS 2 years ago, and now the board does not see that you received a PCS decoration. Do you think it factors in? Everything factors in. but that is definitely going to be something that most board members will note. And you can figure out for yourself if something counts in their favor or without. So please check your records. You can go to MyPurse and you can type in the search box record review, and a whole page will probably tell you how to review them. I review records all the time. I think I got 3 emails this morning asking for somebody to do record review on. I'm happy to do them. What I ask every time somebody asks me to do a record review is that they do one for themselves first. You're the best person to take care of your career. You know what your career looks like. Don't make me sort through 27 pages of your SURF and decorations and EPRs to go back and tell you, hey, it shows you've been at one location for 10 years, but I found a decoration where you had a short tour and it's not noted in your duty history. Don't make me tell you that. Fix that stuff beforehand. Take a little pride. I've taken pride in my SURF for years, and I try to keep it as accurate as possible. And guys, ladies out there, I get it. Every now and then the system burps and stuff falls out of it. Absolutely. It is on us, it's on the member, it's on me to make sure that everything is as up to date as possible and that stuff's in there. I think you get an email 120 days out of promotion eligibility, and you have 3 months to fix your records. Please take advantage of that. Look over it, learn how to do it, have a senior person look over it that's familiar with reviewing records. I'll give one example. Is I raised my hand, Captain came over, I said, Captain, there is no 2019 EPR in the stack. They shouldn't have even met the board. The rules are, if they do not have a current EPR top, it is not supposed to be the promotion board. Captain went away, came back, and we've seen this in other times, and sometimes they say, disregard that record, and it falls out, because they're not supposed to meet the board. This time, the Captain came over and said, please relook at that record. We looked, and the top EP on there, and guess what it was? Promote now. You would be right to assume that that weighed heavily. What I'll tell you though is that 2 other board members did not notice. So this is where it comes in, that 3-person system. You got 2 catcher's mitts after the first person looks at it to find that kind of stuff. So very important to have your records squared away. And I know I'm beating it up, but I cannot tell you how many records, a huge percentage, 20% probably, had stuff that was just wrong. There was a Legion of Merit in there for a staff sergeant. At staff sergeant, I was like, holy cow, I'm getting ready to read some goodness.
Right.
And I read it, and I read like an achievement medal, and I'm like, well, that's crazy. And then I looked, and it wasn't even the person whose record it was in.
Mm-hmm.
So we removed it, and obviously, but stuff like that, you gotta look out for. The evaluation system works. Is the EPR system perfect? Absolutely not. However, it is a accurate representation of your duty history. Bad writing does not mean you will not get promoted. When you review 1,400 records in a few weeks, you can see through bad writing, and what you look for is content. Content shows through. Are you an expert in your job? Are you doing what is asked and then you go home at the end of the day? Do you do more than is asked? Are you just doing what you're trained to do and paid to do? Or do you do more than that? It shows through. And harsh reality, hate to break it to you, but not every record is promotable. It's just not. Whether it's a member just doesn't put forth the effort, whether they're going through things that they're not able to fully focus on the job, I don't know, but not every record is promotable. If you think of what an average is, and there's going to be people below the cut line. There's going to be people below the cut line who didn't do anything wrong, and they shouldn't have any referrals. They just weren't in the pack of average or better. Raters and senior raters, commanders provide a lot of insight to promotion board members. Those push lines are worth their weight in gold to really communicate directly with the board. This is commanders and this is senior raters talking directly to board members. Please use it wisely. I'm going to go to the next slide. All right, so this is where my briefing about the FY20 promotion board ends. And now we're going to go to some general thoughts. These are not directly related to the promotion board. This is honestly my thoughts that I've had written down for years based on reviewing hundreds, if not thousands of records, awards packages, EPRs, you name it, I've looked at it. These are my thoughts. So if you have a question at any point, obviously come up and we'll address it, but this is kind of moving on from the promotion board. But obviously, if these things are taken into consideration, you're going to end up writing your record that the promotion board will see. So take that as you will. Please don't use too many acronyms. There's a couple career fields that are bad offenders of this. Mine is one of them, weather guys. We like to geek stuff out and we use all kinds of metrics and stuff that nobody's ever heard of. And you got to understand. So I'm a weather guy, right? I did 12 career fields, one of which was weather. So I was reading about 11 career fields that I have never been. Now, of that 11 career fields, about half of them are within my group, because I just happen to be at a group where I see all those. The other chief on the panel was a space control guy who had never been in an operations support squad, or he'd never been in an operations group. All he'd ever done in space his entire career, and he was a bit freaked out. He was afraid that he wasn't going to understand anything. Another thing that's good, this is panel related, is you learn that leadership is leadership, and you can determine who's doing just their JOB and going home, and who's doing a little more. So almost irrelevant what the career field is, if the writer takes away all the jargon and acronyms and speaks to somebody who doesn't know. You know, I like to use the example. I want a medical admin troop to be able to tell that a weather guy did their job really well. And to do that, you have to write it a little different. So please don't use too many acronyms. I'll pick on 12th Air Force for a second as a whole and the AOC. When we see packages from here, they are so chock full of Southcom specific and acronyms, you lose people. And I'll just be as blunt as I can. And I've reviewed a lot of records from this organization. And almost without fail, that's been my feedback is I know working in the joint world, working with partners, there's so many acronyms, but unless somebody happens to have worked Southcom, you lost them. So it can be the snazziest, sexiest sounding acronym ever, but if nobody understands it, you're losing out. Spelling out of the awards as much as possible. You know, I know it's a lot quicker to just say Senior NCO of the Year, but it means a lot more to me reviewing records that I know what year you got it, because sometimes you'll see APRs back to back and they'll say Senior NCO of the Year, Senior NCO of the Year. Well, are you double dipping? Did you get it at the tail end of one and the beginning of the other? Because sometimes you see that. So put down what year it was, put down what level it was, because if you're the flight Senior NCO of the Year, means a lot different. You might be the only Senior NCO on the flight, number one. It means a lot different than if you were the wing Senior NCO of the Year. So kind of put that down. It gives it more credibility. It takes more space, but guess what? You're worth it. Placement matters. Now, I will tell you that when I review a record, I read or at least peruse every single bullet. You know, I can't sit here and tell you that in 2.5 minutes I can read verbatim every single thing in there, but you get really good after doing several thousand of them of, you know, catching the important stuff or the ones that are kind of talking your job. So placement matters, and the hard-hitting ones should be on the back, should be your senior rater saying, this NCO is great things to slice bread, and here's my proof. Here's why. They were the NCO of the Year for the base, or something like that. And where you really see problems is somebody gets a Levito, and it's buried in the middle of a bullet in primary duties. Why in the world would you put it there? Like, let's put it in the place that makes sense. Awards matter. It shows that you stand out from your peers. Like I said, we could argue all day about whether it should or should not or whatnot, but at the end of the day, they matter. Does not having an award mean you have a bad record? Absolutely not. There's phenomenal records out there that do not have awards, but they do help you stand out. Personal bullets, something I've seen in the last couple of years, and I never really thought about it, kind of took a minute to wrap my head around it, was when there's a bullet showing that a teammate took care of an airman. And I think it shows tremendous character. And I've had this discussion with a few chiefs, and we're kind of all on the same page. I haven't heard any dissenting views. Let's be honest with each other. Life kicks us all in soft spots sometimes. I can't think of a single senior leader that I know that hasn't gone through something really, really tough on the personal side. That might be divorce, it might be family problems, maybe your kids go through a medical emergency. It might be self-induced, it might be a DUI. I was just deployed, and one of our group chiefs had a very rough time because his father had passed away right before the deployment. And he had a rough time with it. And we kind of rallied around him. Both my parents live in Antonio, and with them pass, and it's going to be tough on me. But have you done something? Have you had an airman that really put their arm around somebody and did something? And I'll give a personal example. I was here 2014 to 16, and it was the worst period in my personal life. I was going through some pretty horrendous stuff on the outside. My head just wasn't in the game fully. And one of my dear friends, Jason McCormick, he was a mass sergeant, I was a senior, and he kept telling me, Noah, let's get you a mental health appointment, let's get you talking to somebody. I'm like, yeah, Mac, absolutely. I need to do that. But then I'm off, jobbing it, doing stuff with my flight and whatnot. And finally one day, I was having a rough day, and he kind of grabbed me by the shoulder. He said, we're going. And he drove me in his truck over to mental health here on DM, locked me in, and stayed there until I went and talked to somebody. And that is a teammate. That is a friend. And there's ways you can capture that. I'm not saying you have to have it in there or anything. I'm just saying I have seen it, and it speaks to me. And I've seen bullets that say something like, distressed senior NCO returned to duty. Something like that. And normally if I see bullets and they don't have numbers in them, I'm like, it's crap, get rid of it. But there's something to be said for the humanistic side of taking care of teammates. So moving on. I was reviewing decorations a few years back, and I think it was a chief said something to me about, hey, they got a lot of good stuff in there, but would they have got fired if they didn't do it? And I'll use an example from within my group and a career field I'm very familiar with, which is air traffic controllers. And a lot of their records look fairly similar. A lot of their decorations read fairly the same. They control this many aircraft at this airfield worth this amount of millions of dollars. They respond to X amount of IFEs and flight emergencies. It's kind of the what they do in power. And I had an air traffic control chief, and he was like, look, this decoration says they earned the money that they were trained to do the job to do. He's like, there's nothing in here shows performance above peers. I was like, wow, it was really good. And he's like, look at any sense in that decoration and tell me, would they have got fired if they didn't do it? And if the answer is yes, then why are we giving them a decoration for it? And it kind of goes to reactionary or visionary. I'll pick on air traffic controllers. And if they respond to 3 in-flight emergencies, and that's in their EPRs, in their decoration, think about what would happen if they didn't do it. Like, they are highly trained on doing this. They don't even break a sweat. It's day normal for them because that's what they're trained to do. They have to do that. There's laws requiring them to do that. I'm not saying that shouldn't go in a report. I'm not even saying it shouldn't go in a decoration. But if you're really trying to show performance above peers, kind of consider that. Where you start making your money on a record is doing the things that wouldn't get you fired. Would somebody get fired if they didn't fill in as a first sergeant, as a tech sergeant? No. If they don't want to do it, they say no, and they go on to the next eager young tech sergeant who wants to do something beyond their stripes. So think about that as a way to distinguish yourself, your troops, from the pack. And I like the reactionary versus visionary. And the air traffic control example is a great one. An IFE occurring is reactionary. They have to respond to it. Something happened and they are required to take care of it. Versus something that's visionary, where you're, kind of going back to expertise of job, you have to know your job well to understand how it's going to change in the future. What's going to affect my duty position, my airman, my mission in the future, and how do we start changing that to be visionary so when an action happens that we have to react to, that we're ready for it. Think of the National Defense Strategy a couple of years ago. We completely pivoted from what we've been doing for 20 years to near peer fight. And we've been told, get ready. So now we're all being visionaries about getting ready for the 2030 fight. So I'm beating that up, but it really distinguishes one person from the next. Huge takeaway. So this should actually be under the board part, but take it for what it is if something happened prior to 5 EPRs ago or 5 years ago in EPR records, and it's not in the decoration, that event never happened. You had an airman that got a Levito and was BTZ at their first assignment, and they didn't get a decoration, or it wasn't in the decoration, board will never know it. So decorations carry significant weight for everything prior to 5 years ago, because that's the only way the board's ever going to know about it. Next, please. And I think this is the last one. So, you know, we had a question earlier about showing that you're taking care of your airmen. Now, on a slight tangent on that, if you guys remember, people have been around long enough, 2014 we came out with a new EPR form, right? And prior to that, there was a whole line on there that said reward and recognition of others. Well, how did we show that? Well, you counted all the quarterly and annual awards your airmen got. And, you count all that stuff up, and then you said mentored 12 airmen. You did a stack of all the awards they got. That was okay. That was the expectation. It's in my EPR, it's in your EPR, it's in everybody's EPR, it's fine. Well, the Air Force had a reason for taking that out of there in 2014. And I kind of alluded to it earlier with discussions I've had of they want the individual's performance, and they don't want them to inherit some award their airman won and claim it as their own. It's still a good way to show you're taking care of airmen if it's done right. So if you're going to do it right, I think what translates powerfully is that you wrote X amount of packages, that you helped your unit with their awards program, something showing you did something. Remember, a bullet still starts with what? Action. What did you do? Not what did your airman garner. It's still what did you do. So a couple ways you can show that is that you wrote a package, you read the decoration, you ran the awards program. Something I've seen, and it definitely tells a story. Let's say Tech Sergeant has 7 troops and 5 of them were promoted. Maybe that's way above the Air Force average. Maybe that's a way you can show it. I've seen it in the past. But you need to show that you're leading your airmen. And I do look for that. When I do a package review for people is how are you leading them? I had this discussion at a strap board recently where somebody had amazing management bullets. They had all kinds of programs. Their fingers were in everything imaginable. And there wasn't a single bullet on their top EPR about leading airmen. There was no supervising, there was no lead, there was no numbers of people. Now, I don't know that person's job well enough to know how many people they had, but we can still show leadership even if we don't directly supervise people. A couple of these bottom bullets tell how to do that. Are you leading your peers? Are you doing wing events? These are all things that make you stand out from other people. Leading peers is one of the hardest things you'll ever do. When I was a young senior NCO and ran the Air Force Sergeant or Air Force Assistance Fund for this base, and I had captains and senior NCOs that outranked me that were reporting to me, you got to have a whole different set of leadership muscles in order to do that. Because bottom line is, they don't have to do anything you say. It's different than being in my work center where I can just, I can flex my stripes and make an airman do something. You can't do that to volunteers. So it's a phenomenal leadership opportunity that is valued. Are you mentoring? Do you know your career assistance advisor? Are you asking them where you can fill in over the PDC? Are you mentoring FTAC? Are you going to ALS and saying, hey, what do you need for your airmen? What can I do to share my experience, help bring that next generation up? You guys got to do that. If you want to be a senior NCO, that's where it's at. Get a question a lot about how much do you weigh the markings? And my previous boss had a phrase that I loved, and he said, if you have 1 point of data, it's just that, it is a point. If you have 2 points of data, now you can draw a line. If you have 3 points of data, now we have a trend. So if I look at, let's say I'm doing a records review, I've got one sitting on my desk, and I look at 5 years worth of EPRs, and I see far right marking, dead center marking, far right marking, far right marking. That's not a trend to me. That is something was a hiccup. And that's when you really slow down and you read and you say, okay, did they have a life event happen? And I've seen promote statements or push statements to say that so-and-so faced significant family challenges this year, on track to get back in the game. Okay, got it. You know, kids got sick, something happened. Hey, you got to take a knee some years. Did they change jobs? Did they move from one type of job to the other that's significantly different? Did they get a new supervisor? Did they go by supervisor and old crusty chief? Now they got a second lieutenant? Maybe it's a story. So you got to kind of dig deeper and look at that. And then the bottom line is you got to read the bullets. And if the bullets are still superior, far right marking worthy bullets, nothing changed in that down year, I don't give it a second thought. Now, if you see 5 years of records and every EPR has pretty much center or one right all the way through that 5 years, it's a pretty clear trend that this individual, while they might not do anything wrong, they are not probably in the average of that career field. So they're probably below average for that. And you kind of have to know the career field to know what's average. But in general, you got 5 years worth of middle of the road, maybe one right markings. I would be willing to bet that you are not in the average. So bullets matter. They need to be written to showcase. Wordsmithing is not what I call good writing. It's capturing accurately what they did and the scope of what they did. Blank lines tell a story. You go back to 14 when we had the new EPR. There's a lot of blank lines, and this section intentionally left blank. This section not used. Hell, it was on one of my EPRs. I still got promoted. I would say that records from 5-6 years ago, I hardly give that a second thought. Records from the last year or two, it means a little bit more. And what's frustrating is when you see far right marked EPR with a not ready now section in glowing push statements. It's very frustrating, or blank lines. And then, so an EPR is a story. Like, tell me the story. What are we saying is going on here? You got a rock star, but you can't fill out 2 extra lines for him? It's lazy. So, you know, I prefer to use words to tell a story. So if somebody's not meeting the mark, instead of leaving blank lines, I would write a bullet saying how they're not quite meeting the mark. You can do not ready now EPRs and not drive a referral these days. I think it's one of the best things the Air Force has done in the last few years with evaluations. Deployment shouldn't be hidden. We do a lot of reach back support. I know here in your particular organization, you got a lot of people who work remotely away from, we'll call it the fight, and they're supporting things that are the fight. It's hard to distinguish those sometimes from somebody who's deployed. And I've seen records that I personally knew somebody deployed, and there's not a single thing that says they deployed in there. My recommendation to all my troops is your very top bullet on the primary section should say deployed 100 and whatever days in support of whatever operation was, and then talk about the goodies that you did there. Again, we're telling a story, and I want you starting off on the right chapter. I don't want to get 4 bullets in and be like, wait, that sounds like deployment. Did they deploy? And you read the whole thing and you just can't tell. So remove ambiguity and put it in there is my recommendation to my troops. Not ready now versus referral. I think there's a time and place for both. If somebody did something criminal, illegal, immoral, unethical, probably should be a referral. If they had a hiccup, whether it was they got put in a job that was over their head and they couldn't hack it, whether they are going through significant events beyond their control or within their control, and they just are not able to perform at that level. I'll tell you, I have seen records that somebody had a not ready now in the past 2 or 3 years, and they recovered from whatever that hiccup is, and they got force distribution stacked on top, and they are now wearing stripes. It can happen. It is not a nail in the coffin. Whenever I see a referral or a not ready now in a promotion record that's a couple years back, almost as important to me as what they did and what they said is how they recovered. If it says, hey, I own this, I goofed up, and I am 100% back on track, and they have 2 amazing EPRs on top of that, I know that they took it to heart. It was truly a speed bump, and they're moving forward. But then you see the death spiral. You see you had a hiccup, didn't accept responsibility, mediocre records, crappy bullets, and then all of a sudden they're sitting at high year tenure and no chance of getting promoted because they didn't own it and they didn't recover from it. So the way I see it, not ready now is a great tool to ensure we're not promoting people to senior NCO ranks before they should be, but it does not eliminate promotion eligibility for 5 years. The last thing, guys, and hopefully all this has led up to you understanding this, why I'm saying this is please know how to write. We owe it to our airmen. We need to know how to write. And writing isn't something that you can brush off once a year when it's EPR time or annual award time. Would you, outside of a few naturally gifted athletes, would you show up to the track on PT test day without having ran any since the last PT test? I'm gonna leave that as a rhetorical question because I hope nobody's gonna say yes. You know, I like to run. I enjoy getting out there, and I can always eke out a good score. But I know that's because I run 3 times a week, and if I stop doing that, I don't do so well. Writing's the same way, folks. I never see writing as a wasted thing. You put the time in, you write Trooper quarterly, and they don't win it. You have done your job as a supervisor. That troop's going to be happier because of it, because I know you're trying to recognize them, and you just polished your writing skills. Solicit feedback when you do write. Send it to some chief, send it to some senior leader. Ask them for feedback. It's the most valuable thing you can do in writing is get feedback. Fight to sit on murder boards if your unit has them. If they don't, email me. I've got a whole presentation about how all the murder board that I made because somebody asked me, they didn't know how to make them. I'll help you run one. You know, you want to talk about how you lead your airmen, develop a murder board system in your unit where you start increasing the number of winning packages you have. Brilliant. It's going to go well. So anyways, that's my spiel, guys. I'm going to stop and open up for questions.
So we have a question here from Chief Mullins. Did you see a lot of records marked exceeded most that the bullets did not support?
So I can't speak to that specifically in the board, but I will say in all my records reviews over the years, I have seen promote now EPRs that are crap, and I have seen promote EPRs that I would pin 2 stripes on. It really boils down to the strength of the peers in that unit. And it's so hard to compare one to the other. I mean, we have to when you throw it in the bigger pool, but there are force distribution EPRs out there that received and must promote or promote now that are fairly weak bullets. And I'm not talking poorly written. I'm talking lack of substance. But the commander probably just didn't have a lot of competition. And you're going to have a whole uphill battle if you're trying to tell a commander they can give 3 force distributions and you only recommend 1. They don't like not giving goodies out. So that's a tough one. And Chief, I'm sure you can appreciate that. But for the most part, in my years of reviewing records, I would say the force distribution ones, they are solid records and they deserve the push they get. I see more promotes that I wish had a force distribution than I do force distributions that I think should have been a promote.
Do we have any raised hands?
All right, guys, if you guys got questions, raise your hand in there. They're looking for you, or type something in there.
So we have a question here from Bradley. How much weight does the board give to the FDs?
So there's no numerical value, going senior airman to staff to tech, they have actual numerical value, 50 points, 35 points, whatever it is. There is no point value directly correlated to the force distribution. So I'd say that it has to do with the record, and I would also say it has to do with when is the force distribution. So is this 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 17, there was a must promote when they made tech? Is this something that was 2 years ago as a tech and then they didn't get any after that? You kind of gotta look. Now I'll tell you, and this is data that's out there available on AFPC to everybody, is how many people with force distribution got promoted. And I think you'll see that the board weighs it very high consistently over the years since we've been doing force distribution. So does the board put weight on it? Data says that yes, they do. And it's hard to argue with hard data over the last 6 years. So no numerical value. You don't get a secret board brief that says, hey, if there's a promote now on top, then you're going to start at an 8.5. There's none of that. You just, to me, every record started at a 7.5, and you work your way up or down from there, depending on what the career field looks like. And that's a big curve. So we grade an entire career field at a time. So you do all your 1W guys, then you do all your 1 chucks, then so you do each one independently. You completely finish with that one. And one thing that I noticed is you would generally score for an hour or two and then kind of take a pause, and then you'd start looking back at some of those and you might adjust a few, because you got to figure out that career field's norm. So when you click a score, you have opportunity to go back and adjust it later. And we found that valuable, especially in that first few minutes, that first hour of a career field. After an hour, you've seen, 20, 30 records, you probably got a feel for the norm of that career field. But, we did try to learn that norm before you start clicking. And we did all the 1Z guys, all the special warfares. So when you're going from, weather guys, then all of a sudden you're grading packages where, bronze stars are the norm, there's valors all over the place, defense flying crosses, air medals. I mean, I had to stop and take a pause and be like, whoa, like you really have to, again, you got to look at that career field as a whole and say, what is normal? Because what's average for a PJ might have been, the bee's knees in space control. So you got to relearn it, and you're only scored against your peers in your career field. Hope that answered the question.
So I think it was in our last Chiefs group meeting, maybe not, I can't remember. Anyways, talked about out of cycle boards.
Yes.
And a lot of our folks are going to be impacted and having to test out of cycle because they are in their location, getting testing material, COVID and all that good stuff. So if you have some time or information, could you talk about out of cycle boards?
I wish I could. So Chief Terry Haroon over at ECG, he sat one of the supplemental boards last year. I emailed him this morning asking him to help me, because this question comes up on everyone. So what I'll tell you guys out there in telecom land is I will work with your chief, and when Chief Haroon gives me that answer, I will share it, and you can send to anybody interested, because I can't speak to it because I wasn't part of it. And kind of like gray zone resolution, to me it was really hard to wrap my head around it until I went through it and I can explain it. I know the talking points of the supplemental, but I would completely jack it up if I tried to regurgitate it. So I'll get that info and make sure I share it with you.
Awesome. Perfect. Chief has another question.
All right, Chief, got another question?
Yes.
That's good. I like questions.
Question is more along a comment in reference to the supplemental board. So now that we're doing a true promotion board, the fact that somebody's deployed or there is no test, so there really isn't going to be an out of cycle board process anymore, or a supplemental board process, because anybody that is eligible is going to be scored during the original board. So the out of cycles will still affect our folks that actually take promotion tests, but anybody that was eligible, regardless of their location, their records should have been reviewed, and the promotion board determined whether they were being promoted or not.
No, that's a great point. And so I talked to a senior math sergeant earlier, a friend of mine for years, and she called me this morning. That's what prompted me to send an email to Terry, was because she was asking about supplemental boards. So she's a senior and getting ready to meet it. And I didn't put two and two together until she said the same thing you just did, Chief, of because no testing, your records meet the board, whether you're deployed, in cycle, out of cycle, it doesn't matter. She was meeting the supplemental board, and here's where people are going to meet supplemental boards is, you're a tech or higher, and you have something in your record that wasn't there. So if that top EPR is missing, or if something was in there that shouldn't be. So in this senior master sergeant's case, there was a record from a couple years back that she worked with the Board of Corrections to get removed, and it got entirely removed from her record. She will be meeting supplemental, and they will be taking a fresh look at it without that record in there that was deemed by the board to not be valid. So that's who she meets supplemental boards these days. For the tech sergeant and up, senior airman staff, they're testing, have their WAPS points, they will still meet them. But for the senior ones, it's only going to be records that didn't have the information on the board meets. So that's a good point. Appreciate it. So I got a question. What is your definition of sustained performance? So I was an instructor. I can't think without a whiteboard, so I wish I could do that. So when I was a squadron superintendent, and we were doing force distribution for tech sergeants. This is a couple years ago. And we had two members who were competing for the promote now. And the boss and I graded them both independently, and we came together, and he had, we'll say, Clarissa #1 and Scotty #2, and I had Scotty #1 and Clarissa #2, or vice versa, whatever it was. So obviously it's a discussion point. We got to talk about it. And everybody else was clearly on the other side. But these were our two rock stars, pretty small panel. We talked about it, and I said, well, sir, why did you have Scotty #1 and Clarissa #2? And he said, well, Scotty's top record is an absolute rock star. And, I've seen his performance here, and he's got XYZ and these awards, and he's made this process better, and blah, blah, blah. And I said, sir, I agree with you 100%, and I do not think anybody can beat his top record. However, if you go back to the ones before that, he has been on a steady slope of doing better and better and achieving more and whatnot. I said, but if you look at Clarissa's, hers has been up here, let's say at 8 level the entire time. So she is a constant high performer, promotable years, non-promotable years. Like, you just look at her records and she is always just killing it. Her top record is not as good as his, but if you aggregated the score, she blows him out of the water. And he said, you're right. And we flip-flopped him, and the constant performer got the promote now, and the steady rising one with that rock star record on top got the must promote. Now, he got all bent out of shape on it, and we talked in the office. They both got promoted, so it doesn't really matter. But he and I are friends. Saw him last week, and he told me that after he took the emotion out of it, he completely agreed with it, and now he's striving to maintain that real steady performance. One of the things that speaks to me is the non-promotable years. And if I look at a record and they made tech or staff, or it doesn't matter, and they were that rock star performer, and then all of a sudden their next couple EPRs, even if they're far right marking, they're just kind of meh, did the job, maybe have a couple good stats, maybe pulled a quarterly, but just nothing really in there. And then that year they're promotable, all of a sudden they're crushing it again and leading airmen. Honestly, I don't want you to be a senior NCO. I don't want you being a good NCO when it's convenient for you to look good. I don't want that in my Air Force. I don't want that in your Air Force. So I think that's what sustained performance means. Are you holding that high standard for yourself, and are you killing it even when it doesn't directly benefit you immediately? So that's NOAA's definition, not the board's. So I've got about 5 more minutes where I got to go brief this all over again. So we'll see if there's any last minute questions in there.
Does it pop up if there's a hand? We'll be able to scroll. Oh, there's Chief Mullins.
There's a chief.
Chief Mullins.
Good.
Chief has
Love
all
it.
the questions.
It's good.
He's asking all the
He's
questions
asking
for
them.
the people.
It's because he wants to make E10. That's what it is. He thinks I have the secret sauce.
Go
No,
ahead, Chief.
it's not. I just wanted to reemphasize and thank you again for taking the time to present this to our NCO and senior NCO Corps, give them a little bit of insight on the board process and how it works and just how difficult it is and how much you guys put into making sure that we get it right. The other thing that I would like to emphasize to my members here at the 612 that are online, these slides have been sent out to my senior NCO distribution group. So for you tech sergeants out there, get with your senior NCOs and they can get you a copy of this slideshow that Chief went through if you had any questions or just wanted to go back and refer to those as notes.
Awesome. Appreciate it. So I'll throw one last thing in here, and I really appreciate you guys taking the time to be on here. I really do, because this is why I went to the board. I was fairly sure I knew what it was like. It was eye-opening, but I did it because I want to be able to share with you guys and remove some of that gray area and let you use it for your troops to make their records better, for your own records, and just so you kind of have an idea about it. One of the foundational criteria of leadership to me is transparency, and I fully believe in doing this kind of thing. I went to a promotion brief when I was a master or a senior, and somebody sat on the board, had the AFPC slides, they read them verbatim, said any questions, I raised my hand, asked a question, he said, I need to refer you to the board. And I lost a lot of credibility for that chief. He's a friend of mine, but he added zero value whatsoever to the discussion. So I hope I've been able to add some value. I customized these slides to try to put a bunch of stuff in there AFPC didn't have. I took a lot of the boring crap out of there, but I hope I was able to get the point across. So thank you, everybody.
And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Chief Vaughan, thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk to our airmen. We get tons of questions, and I always feel like sometimes I am a little bit of a fraud because I've not sat on the board and I don't have that firsthand experience, and I have what I think and what I gather, but to actually hear from someone who's been there, who set the board, who knows, who can articulate and help our airmen better understand the system. So I truly thank you for that. I remember sitting as a young tech and master and whatnot, and just having, again, no idea as to really what goes on. And so every time I hear one of the promotion boards, and I glean more information. I've got 4 pages worth of notes here, again, because there's just, it doesn't matter what rank you are, you just glean so much information from that. So again, I truly appreciate it. For those that tuned in, thank you guys, appreciate it. We'll try and get this out on Facebook, so that way for our shift workers and whatnot, they can, or if you need to go back and refer to it, we'll get it out there. Thanks for everybody's time. Appreciate it. We're out.